So we are downloading a file. Oh, by the way, on the schedule, I think if you looked earlier today, you would have thought the Fibonacci sequence was due tonight. And I wondered why some people were asking me about that when it's not due till Monday. And then I looked and I thought, oh my gosh, it's due tonight. So I shifted it down here, but the Fallen Angel project was on Monday. And so I shifted it to Wednesday because Wednesday looked kind of empty. It looked kind of lonely. So I put the Fallen Angel project there. Because we're really going to talk about loops in detail next Monday. We're going to spend a lot of time with loops today, but that assignment really belongs on Monday. So that's when that's due. So you have a little reprieve there whether you want it or not, you've got it. Okay, but we've got a file to download, and this will just be the context that we work with then today. So let me go ahead and get that file open, which I think I've downloaded already. So today is all about dealing with other kinds of objects. We've talked about objects quite a bit. First, tell me something interesting. Objects have characteristics called properties and behavior called methods. Right. Those are the main two things. So we've talked quite a bit about objects, properties, and methods. But in terms of the objects that we've actually manipulated in examples in class, there's really only one. What is it? The main one that we've manipulated, object that we've manipulated through code examples in class, is a range object, yeah. And it takes a little bit of getting used to the lingo here, but when we say range, we mean any collection of cells, including a single cell. So you're used to thinking of Excel as saying it's a cell or it's a range of cells. In VBA, it's all ranges, even if there's only one cell in it, so the range object. But today, then, we're going to get some experience with several different kinds of objects that we have in VBA. But to prepare us for that, we're going to first take a look at another kind of variable. So throw out some data types that you're already familiar with. You can remember a data type, just shout it out. Integer, string, double, Boolean, single, long. Well, you guys are good at this. You know what? The midterm is going to be a breeze. Okay, good. Yeah, those are all data types. There's one more that we haven't really talked about called object. And object is fundamentally different than all the rest of them. So all the rest of those data types, we're taking a value, we're putting it at a location in memory. And most of them we're fixed with. So we allocate 2 bytes of memory, and then we just work there and there. Then we just put our values in there. And if we try to fit something that's too big in there, it just says, sorry, it can't fit. There was at least one variable length data type. What was the variable length data type we talked about? String. Yeah, so we have string. That how much memory does it use? Depends on how much you're trying to store. It'll use more or less depending on what you're putting into it. But now we have another type called object. And let me just go ahead and get to some code and show an example of declaring an object variable, and then we'll kind of draw a picture over here about what we're actually doing. And hopefully we'll be able to get the picture across. Here's my code. So I'm in my air traffic control workbook, and I'm going to insert a module. Let's just call this Workbooks. Workbooks demo. All right. So let me dim WB as object. So that's the declaration for an object variable. And let's talk about it in memory. So let's suppose that I've got, what if I can draw a picture here? Insert, what kind of shapes do I have? Illustrations? I don't want illustrations, I want shapes. Is there shapes here? Oh, illustrations. Shapes, I'm wondering if I have like a speech bubble. A cloud, that's what I really want. Okay. So here is a representation of all my memory. Yeah, go ahead, question. Does it matter if you're opening up VBA in a sheet or module? The answer is yes. Get it open in a module. Each one of your worksheets actually has a module behind it. So when you're looking at that and you're on a sheet over there, you're actually at the module associated with that sheet. You don't want to be there. You want to be in a general module. And that's the one where you say insert module. That's how that gets created. Let me see if I can take the fill off of this. I just kind of want the outline. I don't know if that even has fill. Good. Okay. So this is just representing all of my memory that I have in my computer. So I've got one little spot in memory right here. And let's just say I'm declaring a variable like x as a byte variable. So can I put borders around? Borders around, outside border. Great. So here somewhere in memory, I'm creating a variable, I'm calling it x, and I might have, somewhere there in my code, x equals 5, and that would assign the value 5 here into this variable x, right? So we would put, I say x equals 5, and that puts a 5 here in memory. That's great. I put the value in, I read it out. That's the way our normal variables work. Strings a little more complex, but the numeric variables work just like this. Now, let's suppose that I've got some range sitting in memory somewhere, or I've got a workbook sitting in memory. By the way, is my workbook loaded up into memory? Yeah, workbook's in memory. I got it open, it's open in memory. Now, if I look at a variable, like a regular variable here, it's called a primitive variable, it's just got one value. There's no properties, there's no methods. If you wanted, you could think of it having just a single property and that's its value, but you still can't say like x.value. It's not really an object. It's got a place to put to a single value. But if I think about a worksheet, it's bigger. Let me put it over here. My memory cloud doesn't give me much room to put this in here. Okay, so let me come here and put in all borders. And let me say, this is my workbook. The German spelling, W-O-R-K. Okay. Workbook's got lots of properties. Can you think of any of the properties of a workbook? It's got a name. And like the name of this workbook is like air traffic control something, I don't know. What else does it have? It has a path, which is where it's located on the disk. That's like C:/ whatever. So yeah, it probably has a size. I'm not quite sure if that's formally a property. Like if I can just ask what the size of the workbook is. Anyway, it's got others. There's a bunch of them, and we'll talk about some of the other ones today. But the point is, as it's sitting in memory, it's way more complex than just a single variable. Right? It's got lots of, you can almost think of it having lots of variables built into it. That's what the properties are. They're variables that are built into the object. So you might think of this and think, oh, that's what an object variable is. No. That's the object. An object variable, we'll put it up here. We'll go ahead and make this one, what did I call it? I think I made it WB. That's not Warner Brothers. That's short for workbook. So let's suppose that each one of these locations in memory has an address. And we usually think of addresses as some long number, maybe some hexadecimal number. So if I was thinking about where this object started, maybe I'll just put it out here outside of memory because I'm just putting the address out here. It's BA5EEA11. My favorite hexadecimal number because when I look at it, it kind of looks like baseball. But and when we say hexadecimal, we're talking about base 16. So you've got 16 characters, 0 through 9, and then A through F, and that's what you use to represent numbers. So let's just say that this particular object happens to start in memory at the address BA5EBA11. What an object variable lets me to do is it lets me say, oh, you know what? I'm just going to put the address of that variable. I'm going to store the address of that variable. So now, when I use an object variable, I say, I want to do something with WB. WB is just like a hop to the actual object. It holds a memory address of where some actual object is. And so it's like a shortcut to get to the object. It could be that you've got a really long description to get to the object. We're not going to do that in this class, but you could actually have multiple copies of Excel open so that you could start by saying, if I'm going to talk about a particular cell, I might have to say, all right, in this instance of Excel, now that instance of Excel's got 12 workbooks. In a particular workbook, that workbook's got 17 sheets. In a particular sheet, that sheet's got millions and millions of cells. In a particular cell, it can be a long expression to get down to the cell you're talking about. But once you've identified that cell, that gets you to the memory address where that cell is stored in memory. It gets you down to a reference to that particular one. What an object variable allows you to do is says once you identified it once, you can remember that address by putting it into an object variable. And then from then on, you can refer to it really easily. And so let me show you how to actually connect up this object variable to this object here. So let's talk about a particular workbook. Now, it turns out that we have a collection. We have an object called a collection. We're going to talk about collections in a little more detail in just a moment, but let's just believe for just a moment. Let me go ahead and open up my immediate window. It's called Workbooks. It is the collection of all the open workbooks. Now, this computer probably has thousands of I am not exaggerating when I say I've got thousands of workbooks on this computer. How many workbooks are in the collection called Workbooks? And the answer is, doesn't matter how many are on the computer, it matters how many are open, how many are loaded in memory, because it's the workbooks that are currently in memory. So I can say workbooks.count, that'll tell me how many workbooks are in memory. 1, that's pretty boring. Let me go ahead and open up another one. I'll hit Control N a few times. We'll open up some more workbooks. And now I'll ask for the count, and come back to me. Now I'll ask for the workbooks count, and there's 6 workbooks open. So I can refer to a particular one of those workbooks by referring to its name. No doubt I have one called Book 3. And I'll ask for its name. Yeah, it's called Book 3, oddly enough. Great. So now that's one way to refer to a workbook. There's several ways to refer to it. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to bind on this object variable by saying set WB equal to some expression that evaluates to a workbook. And now I can say print WB.name, because WB now, all WB holds is it holds a reference to where that object actually is. And so if I say WB.property, it goes, wait a minute, WB doesn't have any properties. It's just a variable. Oh, but it's holding a reference to an object. And so if I say WB.name, it's going to go, there's no name here, but it's referring to an object that has a property. And so now this is Book 3, print WB.name. It should print Book 3. We go ahead and run this code, and then we'll take your question. Okay, question. Oh, yeah, I think every other time when I've said I was going to print something, we say print, and then, 5 plus 5, and that prints it. It turns out in the immediate window, there's a shortcut for that, called just a question mark, and that just means print. It's like shorthand notation. It's a lot less characters to type, 4 less characters to type. And as we all know, the fewer I type, the less I type, the better it is for everybody. Questions? Yes? I can infer this saying subscript out of range. Okay, so subscript out of range, this is the subscript. Actually, a subscript is actually a number. I can refer to this collection of workbooks by its number as well as by its name, and that's common. I'm going to get to your question here in just a second. I'm not ignoring you, but we're going to spend a little time on the way. So let me come up here and print. So here's my workbooks collection dot count. And that'll tell me how many workbooks are currently in my workbooks collection. Now I've got 6. How many do you got? Yeah. So the problem is I can refer to these workbooks either by number, and that's really what the subscript is. So I can say I got a collection here, workbooks. Collections are objects. They have methods and properties. What do you think count is, method or property? Yeah, I don't know. Probably a property. But anyway, it actually could be implemented as either one, but it gives me back a value, when I execute it. There's also some, here, let's do this. This will help you increase your workbook count. I can say workbooks, and all collections have a count property. Most collections have an add property. An add method. I guess we can see, count is a property because we can see it's got the little symbol for property here. Add is a method. Now I'm going to execute that, hit enter on that line, and that is going to add a new workbook into my collection. Where's it going to find that workbook? How does it know which workbook I want to open? It doesn't. It makes a brand new one. When I say add, it makes a new workbook. I should now be able to see this count should have gone up to 7. And so now I've got it. So if you execute this line a few more times, you'll probably get a workbook named Workbook 3. But notice this. Here I've got only 7 workbooks. So there's Workbooks. So what's going to happen if I try to show me the name of Workbook 8? What do you think? How many do I have in the collection? 7. What's it going to say if I try to show number 8? it's going to say subscript out of range. The subscript here is that 8 right there. So if you could think of it, I mean, why is it called a subscript? Imagine that the way we're actually writing this is workbooks, and then with a subscript next to it, like a little 8 down next to it. Which workbook is it? This is workbook number 8. That's why it's called a subscript. We don't have subscripts here, so we put them in parentheses, but it's still the subscript. It's identifying which workbook I'm talking about. And so subscript out of range. And so I'm trying to refer to a workbook that's not in the collection. There is no 8. And I get the same thing if I try to refer to a workbook. You know, maybe I'm trying to find a workbook called book 8. There's no workbook called book 8. But if I keep adding these, whoops, if I keep adding these, do a couple more, I think I'll probably have a book 8 by now. So now I do. And so technically it's only really a subscript when it's the number, but it's the same idea. You try to refer to a workbook that's not in the collection, and so it gives you that same error, subscript out of range. Question? Okay, so here's the question. Look at this. You've got the name of this workbook is capital B, okay, 8, and you asked for the one with lowercase b. And the answer is, this workbooks collection has does it have a method? I'm not sure exactly how it's actually implemented, but it says you can give me an index here. And it says, I mean, depending on what you give me, I'm going to try to figure out which workbook you're talking about. You give me a 3, I'm going to find the number 3 workbook in my collection. That would be the third one open. You give me a 1, it's the first one open. Now you give me something that says book 8, I'm going to look at that, and I'm going to go, I think I know what you're talking about. I've got one called capital book 8, but I'm going to allow lowercase to match uppercase. It's going to say, I don't really care about case. And that's true, right? Can you have 2 workbooks with the same name open at the same time? Nope. What if they're in different locations, like on different parts of the hard disk? Nope. You can't. They got to have different names. Have you ever tried that? You had 2 workbooks with the same name located. You want to open them both because you got to compare them. What does Excel say? Sorry, same name. You can't open it. It's kind of rude, actually. I think it should be able to open it, but it can't. So you might get tricky and say, aha, I'm going to change one of these to capital, and it still says no, you can't do it. So it views workbook names as unique, case insensitive. So it's able to find the workbook that we're talking about. Question here? Oh yeah. So the question is, how do I refer to that one that I'm talking about over here? Let's do this. I don't want to have to type that, so I'm going to say workbooks sub. That was the first one I opened that's still open, so that should be the name of it. Now I'm just going to take that whole thing and I'm going to replace the 1 with it in quotes, and that should identify that workbook. And I believe it will even do it without the XLSM. And hit enter. Doesn't like it. So maybe I have to have the XLSM on it. So .xlsm. But you're saying case doesn't matter, which I agree. Capital S there somewhere, and it'll still find it. It's kind of hard to see that it actually did that because it was already there, but you go ahead and execute that again, and you'll see it print that name in there. Other questions? Yes? Oh, that's a little personal. That's a little too personal for a class here. Okay, so the question is, when I look at workbook number 1, I get personal.xlsb. Now, remember, what's in the collection, this workbooks collection? It is all the workbooks that are currently open. Yeah, it's open and hidden, but it's still open. And so remember, if you've ever recorded a macro and put it in your personal macro workbook, so it's available no matter which workbook you're working on, that workbook's open and it's in the collection. And so you could close it. You want to close it? Let's close it. I'm going to refer to a particular workbook here. What's that? Oh, if you want to reopen it, all you have to do is close Excel, open it again, and it will open that. That personal macro workbook opens every single time you open Excel. So let me take book number 2 here. There's the name. I'm going to say workbooks sub 2 dot close. If I do that, it's going to prompt me if I want to save the changes, which I don't really want to. But look at this. It's a method, and it takes an argument. Save changes. It's true or false. I'm going to put false or flasse. All right, now I've got this. Let's see. Before I execute that, let me check my count. Workbooks.count. How many do I got open here? Got 9 open. I'm going to close number 2. And I'm going to check the count again, and now I'm down to 8. So if you just close number 1, that would close that personal macro workbook. If you're not using it for whatever, you can just close it. Even though you can't see it, you can still refer to it through the collection. Question? Yeah. Oh, can I close multiple? And the answer is not with one close statement, but I could write a loop that goes across a certain range and closes them one after another. It was funny. Before I was a professor, I was teaching, doing corporate training, and I was teaching a class, I think for Blue Cross of California, like somewhere in Los Angeles area. And there was about 12 students in the class, and we had a really annoying student in the class. Do you know the student I'm talking about? Every class I was ever in had a really annoying student. That was mostly because that was me. But in this class, we had another really annoying student. I was a teacher. And he would just make these weird comments, that we just didn't quite connect with. And we had just gotten to something like this. And I wasn't showing how to close a workbook without saving it, but he said it was like how to automatically close the current workbook and save it without prompting the user. And he said, well, how would you automatically close the current workbook without saving the changes without prompting the user? And there's no good thing you can do with that code, but it was just changing this one parameter from false to true, and so I showed it to him, and he goes, oh, okay. And about 3 minutes later, he goes, we kind of looked at him and said, what? He said, I just wrote a macro that automatically closes the active workbook without saving the changes without prompting the user, and I assigned a shortcut key of, can you guess? Control S, yeah. And we gave him a little courtesy laugh, and we moved on. About an hour or so later, I said, hey, this is a good time to take a break. Let's go ahead and save your work. And he goes, we were working on a completely different workbook, but that workbook that he built that macro in was still open on his computer. So when he hit Control S, it invoked that same macro. We had a good laugh then, and then we went to lunch. So it was all right. Anyway, so be careful with this. This is kind of a powerful thing. Closing the workbook and then deciding, for the user without prompting, what you're going to do with it. Okay, so now I want to come back and make sure we focused on this workbook here. So instead of referring to this workbook by its number or by its name every time, I can bind onto this. So here's an interesting thing. Let's do this. Okay, so I think workbook 3 is still open. So let's see, workbook. I think we've got one called book 3. Yeah, it's called book 3, and I think it is probably also book number 3. Yeah, so it's number 3, and it's called book 3. So that's great. So here's what I'd like to do. I'm gonna bind this onto book 3, and now I am going to close the book that's right before it. I'm going to close book 2. Workbooks sub 2 dot close. You can close is a method. You can put the parentheses on the end, but you don't need them if you're not going to put any arguments in them. Okay, so now let me go through this exercise and we'll take your question. Okay, so when I close, so book 3, as we know right now, it is book number 3. Right? What's book number 1? It's my air traffic statistics book. What's book number 2? It's called book number 2. What's book number 3? It's called book number 3. Okay, so let me start to run this. I'm going to step through this by pressing F8 instead of F5, so it'll go one line at a time. So F8, we're binding on to that. I'm going to go ahead and ask for this. It should tell us book 3 is book 3. There it is. Now I'm going to close this line. I'm going to execute this line, which will close book 2. And now I'm going to ask for what book 3 is. What do we expect book 3 to be? What's the name of book number 3? Book 3 is now book 4. Why? Yeah, we took book 2 out of the collection, and book 3 slid up. Book 3 is now the second oldest workbook in terms of how long it's been open. I opened my air traffic statistics workbook first, and then I opened I made a new book, which is book 1. I made another new book, which is book 2. Those are both closed. They're gone. And so book 3 is now my second longest open book. So it is now book number 2. Here's the question. what is going to print here when I print WB? What happened? Did it bind on to the workbook that was identified by book 3 at the moment? Oh, shoot, that's wrong. This should have said, should have had 3 in it. And now it's kind of tough to put that back in place. Did it bind on to the worksheet that was identified when we said book number 3, or has WB now just become a short way to say book number 3? Which one do you think it is? Has it bound on to that workbook at that time, and we don't care where that book might shift in the collection, or is WB just another way to say whatever the third book in the collection is currently? Let's vote. Who says it binds on to a particular workbook regardless of its position? A couple of you. Who says, no, it's just a shortcut for saying book number 3? Aha! That'd be a great midterm question. I'll have to remember that. Because it's just the opposite from how most of you voted. So let's make sure we get that again. So I'm going to stop this, and let me run it again. So now that we're actually referring to the third book here, I am going to step one at a time, F8. Okay, so I've bound that on here. Let's ask what book number 3 is. So book number 3 right now is book 4. I'm going to close book 2, something before that, F8. I am now going to print this out again. So the third collection is now book 5. The question is, what are we going to get when we print off the name of WB2, or name of WB? And it should be whatever workbook it bound onto here. So that should be book 4. Book number 3 is currently book 5, but if I play this out, it's going to print book 4 as that on. So the important part is, let's go back to the picture of memory that we drew, is that when we say set WB equal to that, and we've identified this workbook, it gets the address, the memory address of where this thing is located in memory. And if that shifts to a different position in the collection that's holding all these references to these other workbooks, that's okay. This workbook is bound onto that, or this workbook variable is connected to that particular workbook. I'm going to take your question in a second, but there's a question here in the front. Okay, while you're thinking, we'll take the question in the back. Okay, the question is, how am I executing this code? And the answer is, when I'm up here in the immediate window, I'm executing a line by having my insertion point on the line and just pressing enter. Hold on a second. So that's something. Now down here, there's different ways to execute this. One way is to here compress the play button. And that'll so again, when you hit play, you could have multiple sub-procedures here. And so if your insertion point is in one of them and you hit play, it goes, oh, you mean to play the one the insertion point is in. If your insertion point's not in one, like it's outside of one, like here, and I hit play, it'll go, which one do you want to play? It's kind of rude because there's only one possibility, but still it asks. You weren't in a one, so I don't know which one you mean. Or if your insertion point is up here in the immediate window and you hit play, it goes, which one do you want to play? So, Parker, can you go look and see why he's having a hard time getting that to execute? Let's see, what else could it possibly be? But the other thing that I'm doing here is I'm pressing, if you press F5, that's the same as hitting play, but you can press F8, which is the same as hitting debug, run, no. Where's step? Run? Oh, I guess I got to be on. Let me try to be on one. Run. Debug. Yeah, but why is it grayed out here? I'm not sure why it's grayed out. Can I hit F8? F8. Yeah, that works. So maybe you can't step into unless you hit F8 first. That's interesting. There's no menu choice that gets you there. Once it's there, you can do step into, and it'll keep stepping just like F8 does. Anyway, maybe, hopefully the TA can help him figure out why that's not running. Question, you remember the question? What if we just said workbooks.close? I don't think so. So this would be a close method of the workbooks collection. Collection objects just hold references to other workbooks or hold references to other objects. It really is just a list of memory addresses that it keeps track of. that we can say, oh, you want to refer to this object, you want to refer to this object, and it gives you a way to get to it. I don't think that the Workbooks collection has a property called, it does. There it is. Workbooks.close. I think it would close everything. Have you tried? Let me save. I'm going to try it, but I'm going to save first. Yeah, Control S. Wait a minute. Let me put this back to what it was. What did this say? I'm going to undo to get back there. There we go. Okay, so, this will probably fail. I mean, it'll probably get interrupted because it'll say, do you want to save all these workbooks? But let me be sure I've saved this one. And then I'll come here and try workbooks. I've never tried to close all the workbooks, but it looks like it's true. Workbooks.close. Does it have a property on the end? I mean, does it have a parameter for false? I'm not sure that you can just say don't close any of them. Maybe you can. Away they go. Didn't close them all. Oh yeah, it did. They're all closed. Didn't close Excel. There we go. So yeah, it just closed them all. But it's not because it was somehow going, oh, you didn't give me a number, I'm going to figure out which number I mean. No. You are calling the close method of the workbooks collection. Recent workbooks. I have no recent workbooks. Maybe just thinking about it. Oh, there we go. Enable macros. That would be great. And go back here. All right, other questions? By the way, did the TA get that figured out? What was the problem? Oh, a class module instead of a regular module. Yeah, that would do it. So yeah, make sure that you're making the module, you got to say insert module instead of class module. And incidentally, did we talk about this already? You can accidentally get onto, I think we did, accidentally, like if you double click one of these sheets, it brings up what looks like a module. It is a module, but it's a sheet module. This lets you do great and wonderful things, just not yet in class. So I'm going to close that and go back to my other module. Let me just tell you briefly what that's for. That would allow you to say, I want some code to execute just because the user changed a particular cell to a particular value. Someone come over here and they changed a cell. I want to fire off code and execute, not in response to them pushing a button, in response to them changing a particular cell. So it's really powerful. We're not there yet. Okay. So that then is a little bit about working with this object. We're going to use this whole idea of an object variable multiple times today. It's definitely the most complex variable that we've talked about because it's not just holding a value. Well, it is. It's holding a memory address, but it behaves differently. You can refer to that object, the object it refers to. You can use the object variable plus the name of any of the properties or methods, and it really is just another reference to get to that particular object. We're going to do one little trick here. I'm going to change this from object to workbook. It's still an object variable. Nothing has changed here except now what I've declared. The only kind of object that this variable is allowed to bind onto is a workbook. If I try to bind it onto a range or a sheet, it'll just say, no, it's the wrong type. But the other real great benefit of it, now that I've let know that this is a workbook variable, if I say WB dot, it says, oh, that's got to be a workbook. Here's all the properties and methods you can work with a workbook. So you get the IntelliSense help while you're developing if you've told it not only as an object, but it's an object of a particular type. Questions? I'm going to go ahead and open up a few more workbooks. Workbook. Oh, let's see. Workbook. Oh, let's do this. Now I'll do something more. Workbooks.open. No, .add. There's an open method, but you got to give it a path. You got to open an existing one. So I'm just going to execute this. The walkbooks. That's like Oriental cooking. Workbooks. Okay, so I'm going to execute that workbooks.add a few more times so I can get some workbooks open since we found out how to close them all in one fell swoop. Sure. Yeah. Okay, so the question is, what are you doing? What kind of witchcraft are you doing in that immediate window up there? Okay, the student has protested. That wasn't quite the question. Let me answer the question. Let me answer that question, and then we'll see if it answers your question as well. So if I want to have code that gets saved in my workbook, it's got to be here in some kind of module. The immediate window just allows me to say, you know what, I just want to, this is not something I want to save. I just want to execute a line. Maybe I'm just trying to practice. What would happen if, I said, what happens if I say MSGBOX, enter. Oh, I got to have something on it. MSGBOX, whoops, 5. Oh, it makes a message box with a 5 in it. So it's there to kind of, several things. One, it lets me just kind of test something out. 2, if I want to do something, but I don't really want to make a whole procedure that I'm going to save, like opening a bunch of workbooks. I guess I could go to the worksheet and press Control N a bunch of times. It'd probably even be faster. Or if I'm in break mode, right, I get somewhere down here to where I've got that yellow line telling me which line is going to execute. I can kind of probe things in here. I can say, what's in the variable X right now? Print X, and it will show me what's in memory at that point. So it's really a tool to kind of help you do different things while you're programming. So I'm using this just for some kind of generic examples while we're going. So now I think I've got several workbooks here open. I don't know how many I have. Workbooks.count. Workbooks.openxml. That's not what I meant to say. Workbooks.count. Okay, I got six workbooks open. This should be good. Okay, so here's what I want to do now. I want to make a loop that iterates across all of my workbooks. So let me come here to WRKBOOK. No, let's do another sub procedure. Sub, I'll just call it WB2. All right, let's make a variable. Let me dim X as an integer. You know what? We'll use a byte. This little practice with a byte type. What's the range for byte? Someone tell me, quick. Range for byte goes from 0 to 255. Great. Okay, as long as I don't have more than 255 workbooks open, I'll be okay. I'm not sure you can have more than 255 workbooks open in Excel. There's probably some limit. I don't know what it is. Okay, so now my first workbook open has got to be my air traffic statistics workbook. So I want to leave that one open. So let's set dim, or let's set X equal to 2, and let's do a little do loop here. I'm going to put do events in here to keep myself from getting into a loop I can't get out of by mistake. Make sure I increment X inside my loop. And now debug dot print workbooks dot name, workbooks sub X dot name. Someone tell me, what is this going to do? Someone translate this VBA into English. Go ahead. Book that's open. So this is not adding any workbooks anywhere. It's just saying there's a workbooks number 2. So I'm going to skip the first one, but workbooks number 2, print it the name, 3, print the name all the way up to 6. Actually, I haven't given it a way to get out. So here at the end of the loop, let's do this. If X is greater than, let's see, we're going to loop, until X is greater than workbooks.count. And so that should now print off what I believe to be numbered. My guess is it probably kept the old one. So it's probably going to be workbooks 9, 10, 11, 12, something like that. Because when you create new workbooks, those names don't get reused until you close Excel and then open it again. So let me run this off. Yeah, so book 9 through 13. Wow, I feel pretty good that I guessed it would start at 9. That was really pretty good news. It's an educated guess. It was somewhere up there. Go ahead. The question is, what's this do events? What witchcraft is this do events? So here's the thing. You got to remember that what did I tell you this? The VBA interpreter is a really lonely interpreter. Most interpreters have a JavaScript interpreter. I mean, your browser has a JavaScript interpreter, right? You go to a web page, it's got JavaScript on it. The JavaScript interpreter executes that. Most interpreters, they run code all the time. The VBA interpreter, oh no. The vast majority of Excel users have no idea that the VBA interpreter even exists. And so the VBA interpreter it's really lonely. It's like the Maytag repairman of interpreters. It sits around with nothing to do most of the time. Now we give it something to do. And it says, hot dog, finally, somebody's putting me to use. And it just does it. It does it. It's so excited to have something to do, it doesn't pay attention to anything else. And so I put it into this loop. And let's just say I wasn't incrementing X and trying to refer to that. Let's just say I was just printing the name of workbook number 1 inside this loop. it would print that name, it would go, great, beginning of a loop, print the name, loop to the top, print the name, loop to the top, print the name. It would just print the name over and over again, boom, 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 boom. And I would say, oh my gosh, I forgot to increment X. It's just printing workbook number 1 every time, or number 2 every time. And I'll say, stop. But the interpreter isn't listening. The interpreter is going, oh no, I got something to do. I'm not stopping for anything. And so we got to tell it, we got to give it a reason to listen to be able to be interrupted. And that's what do events does. So do events says, hey, whenever you get to this line, pause ever so slightly, millisecond, pause for just a millisecond, put your head up and say, is someone trying to get my attention? And if not, continue on. And so one time inside that loop, each time it says, is someone trying to get my attention? And so if I accidentally put myself into an endless loop, if I just forgot to increment X, which is a really easy thing to do. If I just didn't increment X, this is an endless loop. I'm going to save, but I'm going to go ahead and run it. So I'm printing the name of workbook number 2. It's going to print that a bunch of times. It's just going. Right? What's going to make it stop? Well, nothing. But because I've got that do events in here, I can hit the pause button, and it'll look. It'll go. Oh, yeah, okay. I'll pause. By the way, I can just start playing again here. Every time I do that, it's going to stop on the do events. It's not like I'm going to Vegas and I'm playing the roulette or something, and maybe it'll stop on a different line this time, because it's not paying attention until it hits the do events. Because that's where it says, is someone trying to get my attention? Oh, someone's trying to get my attention. Go ahead. So the question is, does it make any sense to do this in a for loop or a for each loop? And the answer is yes. It's really easy to put yourself into an endless loop with a do loop. It's a little harder with the for next loop, but you can do it. And so while you're beginning, I'd say it's always a good idea to put the do events in there. It does slow your code down. It turns out on the Mac version of VBA, it slows it down noticeably. On the Windows version, not so noticeably. So often I just leave this code in, even in production systems. But kind of once you've got the code all working and everything and you're comfortable with it, you could take it out. It doesn't affect the way it actually runs. It's just giving you a way to interrupt it if you need to. So that's what do events does. We could take this line out and it would behave just the same. You just couldn't interrupt it. Okay, so I'll run this again and it should just print off the names of my workbooks. There they are. Now here's what I want to do. I want to answer this question. Go ahead. I think so. Workbooks.count. If only there was a way to ask. 6 workbooks. Let's run it and find out how many it lists. 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Only 5. What's going on? Because X is starting at 2. And so if X was starting at 1, it would print all 6, but I'm not printing the one that I'm currently on. You'll see why here. You'll see right here immediately, right now, presently. That's next. Okay. So what I'm going to do is, instead of just printing it, I'm going to close these workbooks. Oh, workbook sub x.close. Workbook sub x.close. Now, it just print off all the names except the one I'm currently on. I don't want to close that one. That's where my code is. Better save just in case I made some mistake. So I'm going to go ahead and run this, and I'm thinking we're closing them all. Takes a little longer to run because we're closing them. Now, if I come back and look at how many I have, open should just be 1. Oh my gosh, I've got 3. Why do I have 3? Do I have 3? Oh yeah. Somehow book 12 and book 10 didn't get closed. I didn't expect to close this one because I skipped that one by starting at number 2. You said something about book 11, but so what's the question? So it printed book 11. Did it close book 11? Yeah, because I think I got book 10. Yeah, so book 10 and 12 are there. In fact, if I look back here, book 10 got printed, but book 12, this is all very perplexing. What's going on? Let me, go ahead, you want to take a stab at it? Sure. Aha. Yeah, that's exactly right. So here's what happens. I say, all right, I'm gonna print the name of book number 2. Now I'm gonna close book number 2. So what, is book number 2 just like empty now? No. What was book number 3 now has slid into book number 2. So I close book number 2. Book 3 becomes book number 2. I add X onto 1. The next one I close is book number, well, it's book number 3, but it's the original book number 4. Book number, whichever one was there, has slid in. I might not have said those numbers. I get the idea. When I delete that one, the others slide in. If I increment X, it skips over that one. So how could I close all of these with this loop? It's a really simple change. What is it? X equals 1. I don't want to close the first one, but instead of counting through, I'm just going to keep, remember, every time I close it, it's going to shift into the number 2 position. And so now I'm saying close book number 2, close book number 2, close book number 2. Incrementing X here now is really pointless, but I need some way to know when I'm done. And so I'm going to do until workbooks.count equals 1. And so I'll continually close a second book until there is no second book to close, and that should do it. Again, this count isn't doing anything here for me. Let me run this, Ruben, unless you're going to tell me that I've got a mistake here that's going to not work. Okay, good. I'll run this and I'll take a question. So I should be able to run that, and that should now close everything except, yeah, I've only got the one workbook open now. And so the point is, collections, one tricky thing about collections is that the position of the objects in the collection shift as things might happen to those particular elements in that collection. Okay, Ruben. Oh, yeah, this is always, well, the printing here now isn't really relevant anyway. But no, this should probably be print number 2 because X is not really changing. Yeah. Oh, just leave it as X is always 2. Yeah. So if I had X equal to 2 here, and this was X, that was X, and it was always 2. Yeah, that's right. It would stay at the bottom 2. You're right. We could have done that whole same thing by just commenting out this one line. Thank you for pointing that out to me. We could have saved 3 minutes of our lives. Anyway, there we go. So, but the point there is that sometimes you got to give some thought to how things might be shifting in the positions of these. That's enough on workbooks, folks. Mostly, it's not enough on workbooks. I got one more thing to do, and that is that there are 2 kind of little shortcuts to workbooks. Let me just do them up here in the immediate window. So this workbook, so it's a built-in identifier for a particular workbook. You ask for the name of this workbook. I am going to pretend for a moment that this is here in the code. So debug.print this workbook.name. Okay. I'll just go ahead and execute it up here so we can see it a little clearer. So it's printing the name of some workbook, but the token, this workbook, is interpreted by the interpreter, and it tries to figure out which workbook we're talking about. It's not so clear in the immediate window, but if we look here, this line of code, when it executes, it has to be in a workbook. There's not any other place that I can put code and have it execute in VBA for Excel. It has to be in a workbook. There's no other thing I can open up some kind of VBA file. No, it's got to be in a workbook. So when I say this workbook, it's talking about the workbook that contains the code that's currently being executed. So when this line executes, it's referring to some line that has to be in a workbook. This workbook refers to the workbook that holds the line that's currently executing. That make sense? There's another shortcut called active workbook. Active workbook. Not case sensitive, so that'll still work. Let me go ahead and add a new workbook, workbooks.add. Okay, so I executed the active workbook, print active workbook.name, it printed the air traffic one. I'm going to add a new workbook here. I'm going to print the active workbook name again, and now it's book 14. Why? Because when I add a workbook, it becomes the active workbook. And so so this workbook says whatever workbook has the code we're executing. Active workbook says whatever workbook happens to be active. So these are two kind of built-in identifiers that allow us to get at a particular workbook without having some long path to know exactly the one that we're after. So that's this workbook and active workbook. Question here and then there.
Those are synonymous.
So this workbook and active workbook are synonyms. The answer is no. Here, let me go ahead and print both of them here on the same line. I'll put a comma here and this workbook. This workbook dot name. So that's printing book 14 because that's when it's active. And this workbook is air traffic because that's the one my code is in. Now technically the code I'm executing here in the immediate window isn't really in any workbook. But it's guessing which one I want, and because I've got this workbook active, I've got a module from the air traffic workbook active. That's the one that it jumps to. Go ahead. Okay, so in real life, why would I ever use this workbook? So oh, that's a more philosophical question. You just given us this great example here. When am I going to use this procedure that you've written? The answer is never. Sometimes what we do in class is we will build out an example that actually accomplishes something. Those are much more satisfying. We can't cover as much ground when we do that. Today I'm trying to cover lots of different ideas about objects, and I still got three more kinds of objects to talk about, and we've only got 15 minutes to go. So instead of having a real life example, I'm just doing little snippets of code, this and then this and then this. And so this is just to demonstrate different things here. So when might you actually want to close a bunch of workbooks? You're having the user open a bunch of workbooks to get some data out, and now you're saying I want to close all of them, except the one that I'm currently working on. So I'm going to say this workbook. I'm going to close every workbook because its name is not the same as this workbook's name, and just loop through and close them all. So this kind of stuff is useful, but not exactly what I'm building here. This example is not ever going to be useful. Except maybe on a midterm. I don't know. But yeah. Okay. So that's really about workbooks. But we've got now worksheets to take a look at. So let's look at worksheets. Oop. Sub WS1 for worksheets. Okay, so now I've got in this workbook, let's do this. Let me dim a variable s as a worksheet variable. It's an object variable. It's going to allow me to connect on to some object. Now I'm going to bind that object variable on by saying set s equal to, in this workbook, there is a collection of worksheets. Oh, good heavens, I'm playing a video game here. Please turn the volume off. And in that collection of worksheets, I've got a particular sheet. I'm after the one called charts. CHARTS. And if I go look at my air traffic, I've got a worksheet here called charts. Incidentally, it has a bunch of charts on it. Okay, so now I have set this variable to a particular worksheet. Look at a particular workbook. That workbook's got a collection of worksheets. Think of a particular item in that. So I should be able to print off print debug.print s.name, and that should print charts. I've identified that particular workbook. And where's my F5? Right there. So that's okay and not so interesting. But now, let's say I've got a dim let me call this one new sheet as a worksheet. And now let me set new sheet equal to, before I do this, let me come up here and just show that in this workbook, worksheets. Worksheets is a collection. It has an add method, just like the workbooks collection does. I say add a new workbook. I call the add method of the workbooks collection. It makes a new workbook. What do you think the add method of the worksheets collection does? It makes a new worksheet. Let's just see. I'm here. I'm on the chart sheet. I'm going to execute that line. I come back here. I'm now on sheet 2 because it added sheet 2. But, and this happens too when I create a worksheet. Did I even do that here? I don't know. Anyway, let's talk about it again. It bears talking about it again if we already talked about it. And that is, here's the WS one. When this executes, it doesn't just add the sheet, it does something else. It sends back a reference to the sheet that it just created. Which means, if I look right here, this part of my statement, this identifies a particular object. What object is this? What kind of object does this refer to? A workbook object. What kind of object does this refer to? Let me hear it a little louder. A collection of worksheets. It's the worksheets collection. This also refers to a reference, or refers to an object. The method add returns a reference to an object. What kind of object do you think it refers to? Yeah, a worksheet. Which one? Yeah, the brand new one that it just added. This thing's a little bit strange, but watch this. .name equals flights. That's going to add a new sheet, and it's going to then name the sheet flights, all in one statement. It's amazing. And the reason that it works is because the add method returns a reference to the sheet that it was just created. That evaluates to a particular worksheet. If it evaluates to a particular worksheet, I can call any of the methods or properties of a worksheet and do something with it. But more interesting is I can capture that reference right by saying sheets.add here. Set my new sheet variable equal to sheets.add. In this case, I'm taking the reference to identify an object, and then I'm using that identifier for an object to call a particular property and change its value. Here, I'm saying this is going to add a sheet and return a reference. I'm capturing that reference in the new sheet variable. Remember that that's what an object variable does. It holds, if I can find it, where did I put that? Oh, it's on charts. No, it's not. I made a new sheet. There it is. So an object variable holds the reference to an object, and that's what gets passed back when I say worksheets.add, a reference to the object that was just created. So now someone read my mind and anticipate the next line that I'm going to do here. I am going to set the name of my newly created sheet. What does it look like? So I want to change the name of that sheet. Now it happens to be I know that it's the active sheet because whenever you add a sheet, it becomes the active sheet. But I've got a reference to it. New sheet dot name equals new name. Why don't we call it destinations? So this refers to an object. What object? The object that was just created, the sheet that was just added. This then captures that reference, and so now anywhere I want to, I can say that object variable and then call any property or method that's associated with the object that it just created. Let me go ahead and run that. We'll see that it works. It's created a sheet and it's named it destinations. Of course, if I try to run this line again, it'll cause me an error. Why? I can't have two sheets with the same name. It'll still create the sheet, but when it tries to name it, it'll fail. So I'll have a new sheet there, but it won't be named to destinations. This is a really important, kind of model here to say I'm declaring some kind of object variable. I'm creating a new object, capturing the reference to that object, and then I can use that name to do whatever I want to, to that, from henceforth and forever. I want to put on I want to run some data onto that sheet. Great, new sheet. I'll just use it. We could put a loop on here. I don't have time to write the loop today, but I'll just say new sheet dot range. Ooh, what have I done? New sheet dot range, and then I guess I'll refer to A1. Actually, let's put a bunch in here. A1 to A10 dot value equals, I don't know, data. I'll just put the label data into the first 10 cells of column A. A little bit strange because I've got now one of those cells. Range is going to put that into all of them. I'll have to change this from destinations to something else, arrivals. And then I'll run that, and it should now create a new sheet, call it arrivals, and put some data onto the sheet. It just says data there in 1 through 10. And so that's the whole idea. I can say I don't know what it is. I don't know what it's named. I can let the user put the name. I've got a reference that goes directly to that object. Questions? So we're adding sheets. We're naming sheets. What else do we do with sheets? I guess we delete sheets. Kind of the same problem you can have deleting sheets out of a collection as you can with deleting workbooks out of a collection. Can I think of anything else to do with worksheets for this example? Time's up. Let's move on. Okay, so actually we'll go ahead and work on this one because I've got a reference called S. Oh, I'm going to comment out. Now I'm going to make a new. Let's make a new one. I'm going to copy the part that gets me to my sheet charts. So now I've got WS2. Actually, let's call this shapes. SHAPES 1. Okay, so same startup. I'm referring to a particular sheet, and I'm binding on my variable S onto that sheet. So now what I'd like to do is print off the names of all of the shapes on the sheet. Remember, this is the one that has all those charts. And the way that charts work in Excel, the charts don't sit themselves onto the sheet. They sit in shapes. So the shapes are on the sheet. The charts are in the shapes, but they're actually shape objects that I'm working with here. So let's make just a variable X as a byte. And let's do a do loop. Do and loop. Do events. X equals X plus 1. And why don't we loop until X is larger than my worksheet S. Remember, I have bound S, the variable name S, onto my charts, my sheet called charts. S.shapes, a collection of all the shapes on my worksheet. If it's a collection, it has to have a property called count. So I'm going to continue to execute this until X gets larger than the number of shapes that I have in my shapes collection on my charts sheet. So I'm going to do until, what am I going to do? I'm going to print the names of those shapes. So debug.print s.shapes sub x.name. Clear off my immediate window. So this now is going to bind a variable onto a particular sheet. It's going to use that variable to be able to refer to the collection of shapes on that sheet, and we're printing off the names of those shapes. Probably don't normally think of, you probably don't think of shapes having names, but they do. Index is out of bounds. Oh, I got to give X a starting point. So right now X is 0, and there's no shape number 0, so X equals 1. Oh, after I declare it. Yeah, thank you very much. Should be declared before I initialize it. X equals 1. So there happens to be called chart 4 through 12. I don't have to stop there. That's the shape. The shape, then, if it has a chart, it has a reference to the chart object called chart. It's the chart that it holds. And if I want to look at the titles of those charts, shapes.chart.chart title, stupidest name for a property. I spent an hour looking for the title. It's called chart title. And then it has a property called text. That should actually be, uh-oh, I'm lost. That should now show the names of those charts. Well, not the names, but it should show the titles of those charts. And there they are. That's what they say. Asia, Australia, Canada, Central America, and so forth. What happens if you don't include .text? I don't know. So chart title is an object. I can't really print the object. Might it guess that I mean the text? It's possible. I'm not sure. Let's run it and find out. My guess is error. But it might. Yeah, it didn't quite know. It's not defaulting to the text property. It should, but it doesn't. I hate the chart title property. Anyway, text. Let's do one more thing here and we'll call it good. And that is, I don't just want to print this, but I want to rename all of those, because what those numbers really are is their destinations from San Francisco International Airport to those different continents. And so I want to change the text of the chart title. So I'm going to say the text of that chart title is equal to SFO, SFO 2, and then I want to put on the existing name. So the name that's there is already like Asia, Mexico, Canada, and I want to change the title from just Asia, Mexico, Canada, what it currently is, to prepend SFO2 in front of all those charts. So I'm going to put a new value into the text of the chart title of the chart, shapes of the S, the sheet I'm working on, the particular shape that I'm looking at. It's going to be these 7 characters, and then the existing text put on the end of it. Whew. So I'll run that. That should print those off, but it should also have changed those over here in charts. And so I've used what I know now about manipulating some other objects to say, oh, I want to go do something to all the charts that I have on this particular sheet. And there's finally, in the last minute, we got something that was useful. So there it is. Okay, I think that's it for today. Thanks for coming. I'll see you next week. Class dismissed. Yeah, don't run this again, or it'll say SFO to Asia. Whatever title's there, it's just putting these other characters in front of it.